In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can edit the database in order to create a custom aircraft. So as far as aircraft and many of the different items go, we're going to be using a pretty standard style workflow. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy an existing aircraft. Afterwards, we're going to put in all the critical typical data, such as takeoff distance, wingspan, size, modifications, and then we're going to build the propulsion of that particular unit. Building the propulsion is a little complicated because it's not simply a matter of throwing in an engine as well as fuel consumption. It's also going to be setting different types of altitude bands and everything along those lines. Afterwards, we have the ability to go ahead and add some fuel. Again, we're going to have to do a little bit of math here in order to make sure the amount of fuel that we add matches the appropriate amount of propulsion. Then we're going to add things for loadouts. After we build any sort of loadouts, the first loadout we're always going to do is going to be the ferry loadout. That will dictate all sorts of functionality as far as our propulsion goes. So as you're going to see, this is going to get one of the hardest parts of it. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and copy any sort of information we need, such as cruise speed and altitude. Again, depending on whatever we did here as far as our loadouts are going to dictate this. Afterwards, what that's going to do is it's going to tweak our burn rates. It's going to change our ferry range and everything along those lines. And then we're going to have to go back to the propulsion, double check to make sure our fuel is correct. And again, you're going to see this coming in a bit of a loop when we actually go through the steps. Afterwards, what we're going to do is we're going to run the validation check. The validation check is incredibly powerful. It'll basically run through and identify any mistakes that we have made up until this point. It'll even make suggestions. For example, when we ran our propulsion, for example, we were burning way too much fuel for the given ferry that we were supposed to be having. Afterwards, we're going to take a look at any errors and we're going to correct them. Usually when we correct the errors, it's a pretty straightforward experience. Generally, the first thing we're going to have to do is go back and add loadouts, and we're going to end up in a bit of a loop here. Again, we're not going to go through every possibility because we'd be here for 3.5 hours. Afterwards, we're going to go ahead and add any communications we have to it, any sort of special mounts. Again, if we're using with aircraft, a mount's typically an integrated gun. For example, if we're looking at an A-10, obviously you've got the big 30 millimeter on the front. And of course, we're going to add any special sensors and arcs. Keep in mind, if we're not making any changes to anything on this side, we can just concentrate on these pieces without doing any damage to everything else inside of our database, as you will say. All right, so let's go ahead and now run through this process and see what this looks like. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to go to aircraft. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to want to go ahead and copy an existing aircraft. Now, this is a critical step here, and if you actually take a look at my data sheet view real fast, you'll see that we have all these little database IDs throughout here, as well as all these different aircraft that we have at our disposal. So in this particular case, we're going to keep things nice and simple here, and we're just simply going to take the F5E and we're going to upgrade it to some modern standards, maybe throw in like, a helmet-mounted sight or something along those lines. So this is where your best friend is going to be the different capabilities for searching. So I'm going to go up to the tippy top, I'm clicking on the filter. Go text filters, I'll do contains. We're going to concentrate on the F5E. Press the OK button, and it's going to automatically filter all our data here. All right, so now we just need to go ahead and pick which one of these we're actually going to concentrate on. So I'm liking this, let's see here, United States Air Force. This one looks pretty good. So that is 3839. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to disable my filter here. And I'm just going to remember the number 3839. And the reason I'm doing it that way is that I don't make more work for myself a little bit later on, as you'll find out pretty hard. So we're going to find our aircraft 3839. There it is, United States Air Force. Actually, we'll go with the more modern one, 3838. Now I'm going to go up to add-ins, command, copy entry. So now I have a brand new entry that automatically finds a spot called 5080, and it's going to be F5E Tiger. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my form view. So now it's time to go ahead and work on our next step here. So in this case, I'm going to be interested in the name, country, service, and all these other details as well. So let's go ahead and concentrate on one of those at a time. So this is my F5E3. So obviously this is a brand new Tiger, so we might as well go up. We'll call this one the F5G Tiger, and we'll just call it the Tiger 3. We'll say United States. We're going to assume Air Force. The year available, of course. We're going to assume this came into existence, and we'll call it 2015. We'll say it comes out of existence in 2025. Comments, example. This little checkbox here says complete. It's simply a little exercise that can remind you that you finished it if you need to go back and check it later on. The hypothetical checkbox is a nice little filter view that we have in our database. So I'm going to go ahead and click on hypothetical. This is a hypothetical unit. We can uncheck complete, but I'm not worried about that too much. All right, our length, wingspan, height, and crew, I'm going to leave completely alone. We're going to assume that anything that we do here is only going to have a minor change. So our empty weight, I'm actually going to increase partially here to represent some of the new avionics that we're going to toss in there. We'll call it 4,500 kilograms, so we're just going to make it just moderately heavier. Agility, since we're going to be using fly-by-wire controls, we're going to assume we have a modest increase of agility. We'll say it goes up to a 3.7 overall. Another way to think about agility is what generation of the fighter we're dealing with here. We have instant climb rate. Obviously, we've increased our weight weight just a tiny bit, so that may have a negative impact on our instantaneous climb rate. Again, we're just making some quick little estimations here, and you'll notice that our average climb rate automatically updates itself. Total endurance, I wouldn't worry about it. And Super Cruise is a simple checkbox that says that we can cruise without afterburners. Ferry range, do not touch at this time. Do not touch any of these three values. These values, other than takeoff and landing distance, are something we're not going to worry about next. So coming over to category, we have a fixed-wing aircraft. That is correct. We have a multi-role. It is an FA sort of an aircraft. We can do more than one platform with it. The size does not change in our airplane. Our runway does not change in this airplane. Now, the interesting thing is we actually have the ability to go ahead and dial in some little quirks here. For example, we can apply some engine armor. Let's assume we put a little bit of, let's say, carbon fiber surrounding it, maybe some Kevlar or something along those lines. And we'll say it's assault rifle resistant. Give it just a tiny, tiny bit of extra protection here. Visibility is not going to change for this particular aircraft. It's just going to be kept as a bubble canopy. But if we wanted to, we can make this, observation bubbles or something like that. Again, it's pretty high visibility aircraft. On this side of things, we can then go ahead and take a look at any of our visual mods, IR mods, or radar mods. So in this case, we're going to leave most of these alone. We can enter these values ourselves if we know them, but we can go down to visual mods. Let's assume that this is a low visibility camouflage scheme. Let's assume for IR mod, we didn't do any modifications here. Unfortunately, we cannot do anything, but notice there's an option that says plane is not detectable, which is a very, very unique aircraft. I believe Wonder Woman has the same type of aircraft as well. Below that, we have the radar modification. We can simply say maybe we put a little tiny bit of stuff on it to make a little bit of radar absorbent material. Maybe we change the ducting just a teeny tiny bit. Again, we can obviously make it bigger if we wanted to as well. We're not going to do any fancy shaping. We'll just assume that it's got a little bit of paint that maybe improves its reduces its visibility. And you can see these numbers on the top have automatically adjust themselves. So as far as codes goes, this is any special properties to this aircraft. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and say night navigation attack. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and we're going to do fly-by-wire. Again, that's where our extra weight came from right there. Let's see what else we can do here. We're going to say it has an advanced navigation bomb sight. It's INS. Again, it's probably going to use whatever the local equivalent is. Let's see here. Our particular aircraft, we're also going to say that we threw in a little bit of the capability to do some probe refueling as well. And that's quite an upgrade for an F5 for sure. Underneath here, we have our ability to set our engines as well as our onboard fuel. We're not going to touch either one of those yet because this is where we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble very, very quickly. So our next step inside of this process is going to be building the propulsion. Building the propulsion, like I said, is one of the toughest steps that you will do. We'll take a look at the kind of basic version of it and kind of understand what steps you will have to do if you have a custom propulsion system. So in this case, since we're not doing any changes to this aircraft as far as airframe or fuel capacity, and again, we made it a little bit heavier, but that's okay. We do not need to do anything special with this engine. We can simply use the same engine. Let's take a deeper look at the propulsion page for a second here. So when you open up a propulsion page, you're going to be treated with this window. The first thing you're going to have is you're going to have the name as well as the type. You're also going to have what type of engine it is. You're going to have the number of engines. And you're going to have the thrust, military, in kilograms force. To the right of that, you're going to have the specific fuel consumption. Again, this is at military power. You're going to have the percent usage of military. This simply says how far is the throttle going to be pushed forward, or how much total thrust are you going to need in order to achieve your military speed with this aircraft. To the right of that, we have the thrust from the afterburner. Keep in mind, this is going to be a little bit different depending on what's actually going to go on here. In this case, you can see we have a pretty substantial little kick when the afterburner comes in. We also have the fuel consumption from when the afterburner is running, the total percentage of afterburner, which is actually going to be using it, as well as our final total thrust with everything taken into account. Now, after you've put all these different values in for your particular engine, if you come down to the bottom right, this is where the part gets very tricky. You have a chart here which is going to list all the different altitude bands, the different throttle settings, what defines the altitude band, both as feet and meters. Keep in mind, if you change either of these, it will automatically update the other one. It will give you the speed in knots of that band of that particular throttle setting. So for example, if I was at full power at 12,000 to 24,000 feet, my speed would be 570 knots. My particular Mach speed would be 0.89. Again, that'll calculate that automatically. And my fuel consumption in kilograms per minute will work out to be about 50.04 kilograms per minute. Keep in mind that any changes to this can have catastrophic effects to everybody linked to it. Now, if this particular aircraft were going to be designed in such a way that there were going to be changes to this particular unit versus other units like it, we would absolutely 100% have to clone this particular propulsion, make changes to it. Otherwise, any changes we made to this propulsion would instantly impact every single aircraft that had the exact same propulsion type. So we have to be tremendously careful with that whenever we make those changes. Again, if we wanted to do that process, we do exactly what we normally do, But anything we do as far as that new unit goes, we'd have to make sure we take the time to go ahead and activate that as well. So now that our propulsion's all set, we'll go ahead and close it. And now we'll take a look at our next step. So our propulsion, again, we can come back and tweak later. Now what we want to do is we want to add any fuel to this unit. Now, fortunately for us, when we set this unit up, we're going to be keeping both the engine, its general air performance the same, and we're not going to change the amount of internal fuel that it has. One of the nice things about the internal fuel is it will actually calculate that automatically for us based on what we have set as far as different items goes. Like, for example, if we do the quick multiplication and say, okay, so it's using this much fuel at that sort of a distance, and we calculate it, it'll actually tell us in the validation report later whether or not we've gotten that correct. The next thing we're going to take a look at is going to be adding our loadouts. Now, adding loadouts is a bit of a process depending on what you're trying to do. In our case, the most critical loadout that we need is going to be the ferry loadout because it's going to dictate everything about this particular aircraft. So I'm going to go to our loadouts. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the ferry loadout here. I'm just going to double click real quick right there, and I'm going to copy this because we need to have a unique ferry unit. So in this case, our user here is going to be the F5G. It's going to be a ferry loadout. I'm not going to make any other changes, but I am going to make a mental note of this particular number so that we can come over here and we can now define that, put that one right in there. If this appears blank, it doesn't mean that we've made a mistake. It simply means that the form is not updated. So I'm going to go ahead and take this other one while we're at it. We'll go ahead and make a copy of that as well, just to make it nice and easy for us. I'm going to go to Command, Copy Entry, and I'm going to go ahead and change the user on this one also to the F5G. And I'm just going to go ahead and now make that note of that. It's 28240. I'll go ahead and close my loadouts page real quick. I'll go ahead and now paste that one in down here. And I'm going to go ahead and make a quick little save, close that, open it back up. And now I can see that my two loadouts have appropriately populated themselves here. Now, the important thing about the ferry loadout is whatever your ferry distance is going to dictate the ferry range of this particular aircraft. And again, that's going to be a critical calculation for you. So if we were to double click on that real quickly and go into loadouts a little bit more detail later, you can see that this number is going to be the ferry range. Also note with this particular aircraft that we have attached 3 275-gallon drop tanks to it. So whatever the internal fuel plus this equals this particular range. Getting these values any confused will instantaneously complicate anything that you have connected to your propulsion. In this case, like I said, since we made no airframe changes, I'm not going to panic about getting that perfectly right. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at our next step. In this case, now that we've got a ferry loadout, this is the time to go ahead and add any cruise speed and altitude. But like I said, since we didn't make any changes to this particular unit, we don't have to worry about messing with this. So our next step is going to be to run the validation. So the validation process is basically going to take a look at everything inside the database and check to see if we've made any errors. Let's go ahead and take a look. So to validate, we're going to open up the DB tools. We're going to click on the validate option, and we're simply going to select our database that we're working on and let it run through the validation process. All right, the validation process is finished. We're going to press OK. Now you're going to get two different files for the data validation. Now, the first one is going to be a CSV file, which you can go ahead and open. In this case, I don't have Excel installed at the moment, so I'll go ahead and just take a look at it this way. The second way is you can actually open up the database itself and take a look at the database report. In this case, if I go up to All Access Objects, type in validation, you can see that it gives me a chart with all the different validation errors that were generated during that last run. So now the thing to remember here is if we go to my aircraft, I have aircraft 5080. So anything that has 5080 in it is going to be something that I'm interested in. In this case, I'll start looking around very briefly to see if anything is coming up as far as 5080 goes. I got a 5060, I got a 5060, a bunch of 5060s. We're just going to go scroll down. 5061, looks like I'm not seeing any concerns at this time. So in this case, our aircraft completely passed the initial validation check. Now, the reason we were so successful with this, oh, there's a mistake. Aircraft does not carry bombs and or rockets, but has a bomb sight. So we only made one critical mistake here. And that, again, is something that's relatively quickly and easily fixed. So I'm not going to stress about it too much here. But again, just because an aircraft or something does not pass validation does not mean it cannot be used. It just means there may be internal contradictions or there'll be something about it that breaks the regular simulator. So let's go close that and let's go ahead and fix that problem. So the first thing I want to do here is I noticed that I added these AIM-9 sidewinders. I'm actually going to double click on that real quick. And I'm actually going to swap this. Instead of AIM-9s, we'll go ahead and throw in some AIM-9Xs. Why not? So I'll come down here. I got the AIM-9M. Go ahead and press that little checkbox here, and we'll see if we have an AIM-9X that's going to be easy to get to here. So we had a total of 4 of those. So let's see, 4 up. There we are. Bingo. So now we've made a quick little change as far as that particular loadout goes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this real quick. Same exact technique as before. Add-ins, Command, Copy Entry. I'm going to go ahead and make this an air to ground. So we're going to say I'll call this one Mark 84. Keep it nice and simple. And we're simply going to come down here. We're going to leave 2 sidewinders on because typically they're carried on the wingtips. We'll say 2 out of 2. We're going to have to take one of these drop tanks off because that is too many drop tanks for us. So we'll say we have 1 center drop tank. Now we're simply going to add ourselves a couple bombs as well. So let's see here. We'll go ahead and type in MK84. Mark 84 is actually fairly large for an airplane this big. We'll go ahead and do this. We'll add a pair of Mark 83s. There we go. So now as soon as we do that, it's going to automatically start populating. You can see that there's going to be a little option down there that's going to start running some quick calculations for us to go ahead and double check to make sure everything makes sense for us. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a total weapon quantity of 7. This should be pretty straightforward here. Let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like our total weapon quantity is actually 5, but that'll be updating momentarily once we pull away or save and then reactivate this particular thing. Coming down here, I see I'm actually set that real quick. Perfect. Total ready time. This is how long it's going to take us to ready it. This is going to take us how long it's going to take in seconds to ready it if we're in sustained. Default mission profile. This is pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and do a high, low, high profile. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and just take a look at the different options that we have. 5% reserves, 20-minute loiter. I don't think we need anything complicated like that. Cruise at 25,000 feet. Again, we just want to pick one that's relatively straightforward here. I'll be the A6 option. I don't think we need that one. High, low, high. Cruise at 36, dash, sea level, weapon release at max range. Beautiful. Go ahead and pick that one. So now we can go ahead and pick on the radius. Now the combat radius here is in critical value because it's going to dictate how much drag the weapons actually have on the particular aircraft. In our particular case, I'm scrolling down here and it gives us a general idea of how heavy everything is. And it'll even give us a general idea of what the radius would be is if you're at very, very, very low altitude. Note that a lot of these values won't actually link until we actually assign this particular loadout to our particular aircraft. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it real quick. Whoa, I don't want to copy everybody. And now we'll go over to our original aircraft. Paste that one in. And now you can see it automatically updates itself. Now that that's all done, I'll save my database real quickly, close everything, and then I'll reopen it so we can take a better look at what's going on here. So double click that real fast, and now our values will actually update themselves a little more dynamically. One nice feature we have down here at the bottom is it's going to give us a little bit of a report of everything going on. In this case, you can see that we have a couple 9Xs, and we have our 2 Mark 83s. It's also going to let us know everything about our profile and give us a general idea of how much fuel this entire operation is going to take. In our case, if I actually scroll down here, I notice the fact that we end up with negative fuel during this mission, which means that our range is much too far. So let's go ahead and reduce this down to 350 nautical miles, and let's see what that does to our performance. Again, these are all estimates. That leaves us with about 340 kilograms of fuel. So we're definitely coming in pretty much on empty there. Notice, by the way, our payload drag modifier has changed itself dynamically to represent the fact, we're carrying Mark 83s, not Mark 84s. They automatically calculate this, which is why it is insanely critical that we set everything up before we get to this point. So I'm happy with that new loadout. I'm going to go ahead and press the save. I'll go ahead and close that one real quickly. Take a look at my aircraft, and you can see now that I've got myself the ferry, I've got the air-to-air, I've got the Mark 83 loadout as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go run down validation and see if anything else came up. All right, our validation is complete. Let's see how we did. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen up our database again. Make sure the database is closed whenever you're doing any sort of work. I'm going to come down to the validation real fast. And again, we're looking for our aircraft here. One thing to note, though, is our aircraft may not necessarily be linked specifically to what's going on. So sometimes you have to read through carefully. Let's take a look. Our propulsion looks good. Subsonic aircraft. All right, that looks pretty good. Loadout 1032. Unguided weapons at night. Interesting. So in this particular case, for a particular aircraft, we discovered that when we were doing our little loadout here, that we created a situation where we had an aircraft that had all-weather capability, day and night. And of course, we can also consider things like Winchester. So that is something we're going to have to consider when we go back and adjust this aircraft. Since this is a non-precision weapon, we need to make sure that we equip this aircraft with something that actually gives us the ability to deliver that weapon safely. But the good news is our validation is looking pretty good so far. There's nothing really concerning yet. So now let's go ahead and take a look at our next step. So after we've gotten everything like that, we've run it, we've fixed any errors. Now we're going to look at adding communications, mounts, and adding any special sensors on board. So let's go ahead and take a look. So right now we're dealing with the classic AN/APQ 153 radar. There's not a lot to that particular radar system. If we wanted to do a modern upgrade to this particular system, we could come in here and add something different. For example, I could click right here and we could go ahead and see all the different ones we have. I noticed that there's an F5E upgraded radar right here. This looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and click on that one. But it's worth noting now that even though I've made an upgrade to that sensor, the arc for that sensor may not match the arc for the actual unit. So I'm actually going to double click real quickly here and confirm that the search arc is basically right in the front and the max arc is like that, which matches exactly what we have there. So we did a nice job. The other one we have here is we have a digital radar warning receiver. We can, of course, choose to modernize this as well. We can bring out a newer one if we choose to do so. Let's see here if there's anything that would be pretty effective here. Comment on that. Sounds like an interesting little option. ECU37, I think that's getting a little fancy for us. We have, let's say, a radar warning receiver. Let's put the ANALR67 on there. We'll make sure that its arcs are set. Now, like we were saying a minute ago, and this is a great opportunity to go and improve the capability of this particular aircraft. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and add a brand new system on board. So let's see what we have for helmet-mounted sights here. So let's see, we have, I believe, the Classic one. Let me go check it. All right, let's see here. So instead of this one, we'll go ahead and add the 2509, which is the ANAAQ37. This is going to give us an awesome little piece right off the F-35. It is a spherical search. We'll go ahead and make sure that's set up like that. We'll go ahead and throw in, let's say, a 2510, which is going to be an EOTS. Again, we're still in this with the Iris right off the F-35. I mean, why not? I mean, if we're going to do a full upgrade of this airplane, we might as well go nuts here. And you know, while we're at it, we'll go ahead and throw in one of these as well, which is going to be a laser designator, making this aircraft way more capable than it probably ever will be. But that's unfortunate because it is a pretty neat airplane. So now we've added all of our sensors on board. We're happy. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at adding any sort of communications on board as well. So in this particular case, if I scroll down to the bottom, I have COM. Right now we have UH and VHF radio. We'll go ahead and throw in a couple different options here. We'll go ahead UHF. We'll go ahead and now use some secure. We'll see that's got a secure radio. And we'll also go ahead and throw in some satellite communications as well, just for the purposes of making it a little bit easier there. Okay, so now we have satellite communications, advanced radios on board. We have a very sophisticated communication suite as well as sophisticated sensors. We've left the good old-fashioned 20mm Canon on here. If we wanted to, of course, we could add other types of mounts as well. For example, if we wanted to add some kind of chaff dispenser on here, we can come in here, we'll say pen generic, and we'll do a generic aircraft countermeasures dispenser here. We have a couple of different options here. We can keep this pretty straightforward. I'm just going to grab this one real quick. And now we've added some chaff, flare, as well as significant electronic upgrades to our super version of the F5. So now that's pretty much covers everything we need to be concerned with as far as designing aircraft. Obviously, with the propulsion piece, this can end up being a bit of a loop depending on what you're changing. But since we decided to keep it simple and make an existing copy of everything, we don't have to worry too much about this. So now all that's remaining to do is to go ahead and export this and make the database using the database tools into a SQLite database that command can read, and then we can insert the unit as a conventional unit. This basically is all it. And again, every single object that we're going to be creating inside the database is going to be following the same sort of pattern. It gets a little more complicated when you want to start coming in and editing individual units, but we'll take a look at that later.